You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Good morning. It is a frigid, stupid day in Michigan and probably most of the northeast or Midwest. I don't know where I am. Happy Monday. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. We have a lot of little things to kind of get to. I want to discuss recruiting kind of at large. Ohio State and Michigan are still kind of duking it out. Ohio State had a big weekend on the recruiting trail. Michigan did get one commitment in Blake Frazier, the legacy. So that's two in a week and a half span, both on the offensive line. And ultimately, I like what Michigan is doing. And that kind of pairs us to with what Urban Meyer said on Friday, at least I think that was on Friday, about what Ohio State needs to do in order to beat Michigan again. And I think it's interesting, especially when you're looking at the recruiting perspectives. And then we also have the spring games from Ohio State and Penn State to get to. It all ties together. Going to be a lot of Ohio State in this particular episode. All right, so let's get into the recruiting piece first. I'd have to look and see everyone that Ohio State got, and I don't have that up ahead of me right this second. So let's do that. But let's first talk about Blake Frazier committing to Michigan, because that is huge news for the Wolverines. I mean, I got a message about a month ago from a Texas A&M writer who was like, do you think that Blake Frazier is going to Michigan? And it wasn't like you think. Like, I remember my buddy who's an Ohio State fan. I remember him being like, you really think, kind of that, and, attitude. Like, you really think that you're going to get Ben Gideon? You really think he's going to end up going to the Michigan Wolverines over the almighty Ohio State Buckeyes? And I was like, yeah, I do think that's going to happen. And it did happen. That was the type of attitude. This is not the attitude that I got from the Texas A&M writer. He's like, man, you really think that's going to happen? Like, that is just wild. But of course, like, it's a little bit different because he's a legacy. You know what I mean? So when you're a legacy, it ends up being a different scenario altogether, because you have, even if he's living in Texas, he doesn't have the same affinity for Texas A&M. And Texas A&M didn't make his top 5. Texas did, though. You have a little bit more of an affinity because you grew up, just the same way that I grew up being a Michigan fan, in large part because my grandfather. My aunt and uncle went there as well, so, there was other parts to it, but that is where that comes in. So, yeah, it's that is a big get, because now Michigan has 4 offensive linemen committed. All 4 are 4 stars. Jake, whatever his name, Guarana, I don't know how to say his name. I don't have it in front of me. Is the likely center. He's a 3-star out of Florida. Got a really good offers list, though. Well, wouldn't necessarily round it out, but that'd be 5. He's expected at the end of the month to, he's considered a Michigan lean at this point. And there's other guys that they're looking at getting. It looks like this is going to be an offensive line class that's mostly 4 stars that are all like, they're looking at like 7-ish offensive linemen. It's just wild what they're doing in terms, because so the last 2 in a row, Andrew Sprague, Blake Frazier. It's big what Michigan's doing as far as that's concerned. Now, Ohio State does also have 4 4-star offensive linemen committed. But at this juncture, I have more faith in what Michigan is able to do as far as offensive line development, because Ohio State had 5 stars on their line, and it still was, the last 2 years, just been kind of okay, right? Like Nick Petit-Frere and DeJuan Jones, who was a 4-star, I believe. Some of these guys aren't necessarily that, right? Like, they're not necessarily finishing that way. You instead have a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, doing what it's doing. Now, here's the thing. A lot of it's dependent on Sharon Moore staying, because if Sharon Moore leaves, which I said in an earlier episode last week that I do believe that he is going to have those opportunities, and he's probably going to end up taking one, because a lot different being an offensive coordinator and a head coach. Now, the question is, does he end up doing that kind of Alabama, Clemson type thing where it's like, I'm only leaving for the right opportunity, rather than doing what we've seen in the Jim Harbaugh era for some of the guys who have left of, hey, that's just an opportunity, right? Like DJ Durkin going to Maryland. Yeah, it's a Big Ten team, but what's Maryland really going to do, you know? Or does Sharon Moore hold out and say, I want to be able to go to a team that has a chance of doing something, you know? Maybe it's not a premier team, but maybe it is, right? Because we've seen coordinators get those opportunities. Tom Herman went from Ohio State to, granted, he went to Houston and then to Texas. So, like, I forgot about the Houston part. So that doesn't count. But you see guys getting those opportunities. Brent Venables, Oklahoma, straight out of Clemson, right? He was there at Clemson forever. Meanwhile, his counterpart, Tony Elliott, went from Clemson to Virginia. So I think it's a question of what kind of opportunity do you hold out for? But like I mentioned, Ohio State's been on kind of a tear in recruiting the last, really since the end of March, when they got the Armstrong twins. So both of them are 4-star linemen, but we're talking lower end. You're looking at the 24/7 Sports composite, 301st and 344th for the duo. But really, since then, we've seen multiple guys commit to Ohio State. James Peoples went to Ohio State, 4-star, 81st overall, but that was a reaction to Jordan Marshall not going to Ohio State. Mylan Graham, the 5-star wide receiver, on April 4th. Aaron Noland, the 4-star quarterback, on April 8th. And then we've seen linebacker Peyton Pierce, 4-star from Texas, 152nd overall on the 11th. And then tight end, 4-star Max LeBlanc out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, 270th overall on the 15th, as well as Sam Williams-Dixon from Pickerington, Ohio, a suburb of Columbus, athlete, 3-star. So they've really surged. They are now number 2 in the country with 2 5-stars, both wide receivers in their class. So they have surged. They're ahead of Michigan again. They both have the same amount of commits. Ohio State has the 2 5-star wide receivers. Michigan has the 1 5-star quarterback. Let's continue this conversation here in just a moment, because the way that you feel like these classes are being built is a little bit different. And I feel like it makes sense. It'll make sense, especially when you get to the Urban Meyer comments here in just a moment. Before we do that, grand slams, no hitters, and double plays are back. There's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. That's because right now new customers can step up to the plate with a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, sign up, place your first bet. Get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Don't miss your chance to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, continuing on the trajectory that we were on here. Like I said, both teams have 4 4-star offensive linemen committed to their class. Again, I'm not comparing rankings here. Technically one's a 3-star if you're looking at the 24/7 Sports composite for Michigan, and that's Ben Roebuck, the Ohio native from St. Edward, which is Cleveland area. But they've got him. They've got Luke Hamilton, also from Ohio, 4-star, 348 overall. And then the last week and a half, Andrew Sprague and I got to refresh this, Blake Frazier, 158th and 207th overall, according to the composite. The thing is even the guys like Ben Roebuck, like, let me just look at the evaluation here on Ben Roebuck. Okay, apparently there isn't one, but like everything that we've heard about him is that he is an absolute mauler. And he's 6'7", 320 already, right? He was a guy that Michigan really, really wanted. This isn't like a 3-star, like, okay, I guess we'll take you. You know, like that happens every now and again, or it's a camp evaluation and it's like, well, we'll see how you work out. Maybe you'll work out. But then you've got the defensive lineman, 4-star Ted Hammond, 385th overall, and Manuel Beagle, who's out of Connecticut now, but he's European. He's a 3-star. Michigan's still in on some of those guys, like some of those guys that they really want on the line are including 2 5-stars. Whether Michigan gets either of them or not, Justin Scott and Dylan Stewart, remains to be seen. But they, you know, at least Dylan Stewart has visited recently, and we'll see how that ends up working out. But what you're seeing is Michigan have a continuation of what it's done, right? Like, they don't have to be 5-star linemen. Ohio State's got, like I said earlier, Ohio State has gotten 5-star linemen, and that hasn't necessarily paid the same type of dividends that it did in the Urban Meyer era. And in large part, I think that that's because they don't have the same type of mentality, right? Because you look at what Ohio State does under Ryan Day, it's much closer to an air raid than it is this power spread that Urban Meyer used to run. So when you look at what Michigan's doing, Michigan going out getting all these linemen. They've got Jordan Marshall. They've got a tight end already in the class, and 4-star Hogan Hansen. You know, they're continuing to build this thing out. They've got a couple defensive linemen. Wouldn't be surprised also if they go portal. It just feels like they're doing the same. Michigan's doing the same thing that they've done the last couple of years, which is we are going to be elite on the lines. We are going to run the football. But now we've got a 5-star quarterback. It's more important that they have that 5-star quarterback in a lot of ways, even though that hasn't always been a predictor of success for Michigan, right? J.J. McCarthy is certainly living up to that hype. Devin Gardner is one of my, he's a friend of mine. He's one of my favorites of all time. Did not live up to that 5-star status. Shane Morris, friend of mine, did not live up to that 5-star status. But you put all those things together, and that, especially when it's like, we're not doing this to be able to throw the ball. Ohio State has long gotten those 5-star wide receivers and the Brian Hartline era, which I hope he gets better. It's sad to hear that he had his ATV accident on his property yesterday. But nonetheless, you don't, like, you're not necessarily going to have, if you're building this pass protection, it's not necessarily going to be that mauling type, right? Because what's the stat we always hear going into games like Ohio State and Michigan State? It's whatever team runs the ball better is likely going to be the winner. And it happens, I'd say 95, probably 98% of the time. That's usually how it goes. So Michigan is continuing to do what it's done the last 2 years. It's building its team out that same way. Meanwhile, Ohio State is actually also doing the same thing, which is what makes it very confusing, especially given what Urban Meyer said about Ohio State and what they need to do. So we're going to transition to that part right now. So this was reported on Friday morning. I'm going to read the quote from Athlon Sports. They wrote about it yesterday, but he said, "I'm not sure that there's anyone that's ever respected the rivalry more than I have. When somebody says that team up north wasn't very good, then I would look at them and say, you really don't understand this rivalry. It's one of the top programs in America with a great coach. What have you got to do to beat Michigan? You've got to control the line of scrimmage." And really, that is what Ohio State was able to do, right? I mean, 2016 notwithstanding, Michigan controlled the line of scrimmage, at least Michigan's defense versus Ohio State's offense. But Ohio State ended up being able to run the ball and still more than Michigan and won the game. The Ohio State's defense kind of did the same thing to Michigan against an injured Wilton Spate, and Michigan wasn't really able to run the ball. That's why having a healthy Wilton Spate in that game, in my eyes, Michigan probably wins that game because the pass game could be lethal when they wanted it to be lethal. But generally, Ohio State did control the line of scrimmage until the past 2 years. Now, Urban Meyer says Ryan Day is still the man for the job, but I can't imagine he really truly believes that. As long as Ryan Day continues to have the same mentality, I don't know. Now, maybe having Brian Hartline as offensive coordinator, maybe they change things up and try to do things a little bit more like how Urban Meyer did it. But you're not going to have this sexy, high-flying offense if you do it that way. Because Urban Meyer's offense was a thing of beauty in a lot of ways, spanning from, I didn't watch any of his time at Bowling Green or Utah, but I watched him at Florida and I watched him obviously at Ohio State. It certainly could be a thing of beauty, but they are not really building themselves in that same way. You had to have a running quarterback, and he had that at those other spots. And I don't know that that's what they're not doing that, because that was the great equalizer in a lot of parts, was having a running quarterback who, in some ways, depending on who he had Tim Tebow, who was a linebacker masquerading as a quarterback, and then you had other guys that had some different shiftiness. Braxton Miller. JT Barrett was a different, he was a little bit more mundane compared to some others. And then when they had Dwayne Haskins, they transitioned more into having a little bit more of the high flying passing attack. Well, that was Ryan Day also coordinating that offense, and they stayed there. And it worked for 2 years against Michigan. Now, obviously, you had Justin Fields as well, who also ran the ball. They don't have that in Kyle McCord. They don't have that in Devin White. I don't know that they're necessarily getting that in any of the other guys that they've brought in or are bringing in. And even if so, Michigan is building a really stout defensive line. Now, I do want to see Michigan get better, more, I think that the edge rusher recruiting is kind of fallen off a little bit the last couple of years compared to what it was, right? Because you don't have those blue chips like Aiden Hutchinson, despite being, kind of, not a high 4-star, but kind of a decently rated 4-star, highest prospect of the 2018 class. He at least was still considered like that guy's going to probably turn on. And the next year or 2 years later, they bring in Braden McGregor, but we haven't really seen Michigan go and get that high caliber guy like they did when it was, Rashawn Gary, when it was some of these other guys that they've brought in. Derek Moore certainly qualifies, but I think that they just need to continue to be consistent, especially when Ohio State's out there getting your JT Tumalaus, when they've been able to get the Zach Harrisons of the world. I like what Michigan's got, though, and that sometimes it's development, right? Chris Jenkins could poise himself as a first-round pick, and he was a 3-star. So there, at least, it's a development component that is helping Michigan along with this. Ben Herbert, obviously, being $1 million a year strength and conditioning coach. They just need to continue on that trajectory, but you can't let the recruiting element go lax. And if you can also bring in another guy who can be a game changer, that's what they obviously wanted to do with Nicholas Harbor before he decided that he wanted to run routes instead. You got to be able to bring in some of those guys as well. Michigan's at least really building very nicely at the moment. And I think when you've got a Mason Graham, a Kenneth Grant types there, they were able to get Rayshawn Benny the year beforehand, and then they've got guys like Trey Pierce coming in, who I think is certainly better than his ranking. You can see the trajectory that Michigan's going on here. And it's good. It's very good. All right, we're going to continue on. I want to talk about the 2 spring games that are of importance, Ohio State, Penn State. No, I didn't watch either of them, but I did read some reviews of them, reactions and such. And again, I think it's you don't want to get too much into reading too much into spring, but sometimes you can read some things, especially if hey, that was a problem area last year and it's a problem area still, or hey, that's a position that they need to step up in and they're not necessarily doing it. I think that's all very important. All right, so we'll get to that momentarily. I'll tell you what, I really do like this new house situation in the sense of I'm not allergic to it. I feel like the last 10 years plus, I've lived in houses that or in apartments and whatever that I have strong allergies to, which is partially why I have the insomnia, partially why I struggle to wake up. That hasn't been the case here. I've been waking up at 8 a.m., which is crazy to me, which is why we're able to have it. I'm able to be coherent. I'm able to get some of these podcasts out around noon. This was the plan. This is the way. the words of Din Djarin. So excited that hopefully we can continue this trajectory for the podcast, having closer to noon releases and all of that. So both Ohio State and Penn State had their spring games. Like Ohio State scored points. I mean, I didn't expect anything different. Penn State, not as much. But I think what is really interesting is that the things that they probably hoped were going to be fixed aren't necessarily. Now, Ohio State's defense looked pretty good, right? So, all right, that's what they were hoping. Everyone in Columbus has been pointing, Jim Knowles, years 2 and 3. All right. Like that's what they've been really pointing at and that's been like the kind of thing they've been hoping for. But that's not what I've really cared about, right? Because what I've cared about when it comes to Ohio State is, do they have the heir apparent to any number of quarterbacks that they've had? Just think about what they've had. And I mean, you can go back into the 2000s, right? Like there's only one miss really out of all of them. And even then they beat Michigan, went to the national championship game, and that was their miss. So we're talking Troy Smith to Todd Beckman, who's the one I'm considering the miss. Braxton Miller, JT Barrett. Was there someone there had to have been someone in between Todd Beckman was 2007. There's someone in there I'm not thinking of here because Braxton Miller wasn't until 2011 there. Terrell Pryor. That's who I'm missing. So Troy Smith, Todd Beckman, Terrell Pryor, Braxton Miller, JT Barrett, Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, CJ Stroud. I mean, that is an incredible streak. But then you get into the spring game. Devin White injured, incapable of playing, but supposedly it was the leader of the pack anyway. It was Kyle McCord, and he's the one that everyone's penciled in as the starter. And he didn't look that good. And yes, you can sit there and say, well, those receivers are going to help him out. But what happens if they don't? What happens if Ohio State finally falls down to earth a little bit? Michigan had, a top flight receiving core, even in the Jim Harbaugh era. Unrealized as recruits, unlike Marvin Harrison. I'm a little more reluctant to put Emeka Egbuka up there yet. Or Julian Fleming. But I mean, Julian Fleming was a 5-star, top rated guy in the country. But you look at like Michigan had Donovan Peoples-Jones. Yeah, Tariq Black got injured, but Nico Collins. They had some pretty good receivers at a point, right? And when you don't necessarily have that the quarterback that's going to necessarily get the ball there, right? CJ Stroud was probably helped out a little bit by his receiving core, but he also probably helped out the receiving core as well. So when you have this as a situation like that, everyone makes everyone else look better. And so now maybe Ohio State falls back down to earth a little bit offensively. Like if they find themselves in the same situation, say, as Michigan State going from Kirk Cousins to Andrew Maxwell before they found Connor Cook, right? Andrew Maxwell was like the higher rated guy. Everyone was excited about him. Connor Cook was a 3-star. He wasn't supposed to be that guy. And it didn't work out. At some point, Ohio State is going to find themselves in that situation. And it very well might be right now because Kyle McCord did not look like, yeah, okay, they got their next Heisman Trophy candidate quarterback. Because really, all of them that I just mentioned were at least that, except for Todd Beckman. But they had Petey Wells, so it kind of didn't even matter. So that's an interesting thing to know. Penn State, a.k.a. the best running back tandem in the nation, according to Big Ten Network. I think you forgot about that they're not even the best running back tandem in the division. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton were very good, but they were not Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, right? And everyone's super excited about Drew Aller, and he very well, and supposedly he looks pretty good, right? Led the Nittany Lions offense right down the field, got a touchdown. They lost a couple other pieces, Mitchell Tinsley and who's the other guy? I can't remember. That's all good and well, right? Penn State's issue hasn't been quarterback. It hasn't been receiver. It was running back for a while, but now they got a couple guys. What have they really struggled to do lately? It hasn't been defense. It's been offensive line. Now, they had a mobile guy in Sean Clifford. If you think back to 2021, that game, it was like, it started out like, oh man, Michigan might have 15 sacks today. Like the first 2 plays from scrimmage were Sean Clifford running for his life before they made an adjustment to get rid of the ball faster. And they kept things within arm's length before taking the lead late. And then Michigan just took it right back. But Sean Clifford was mobile and able to do that. Drew Aller is not mobile and was running for his life. Michigan has questions, yes, at pass rush. Without Mike Morris, without Iabioki, they intend on solving that, and it sounds like they have. It looked like they had in the spring game. One of the things that you're looking for in these spring games are that thing that's been a weakness has been shored up at all. Whether it was a weakness in the season or it was personnel leaving and you were hoping to see it do something differently, well, guess what? Neither Ohio State nor Penn State answered the call. Michigan, pass rush, did. Corner, we'll see. But otherwise, Michigan did what it was mostly supposed to do. Ran the ball, passed the ball, protected. There's the offensive line had some moments, but again, that's also, I don't know. I will say this up front. I don't know how Penn State necessarily split up their squad, because I will say that it is different when you have like a draft like Michigan did, or if you do like some teams do 1s versus 2s. I don't know what Penn State did, but Penn State's offensive line hasn't not been that good in a very long time, and it still was not very good in the spring game. So it will be interesting to see how that is. Now, the good news for Penn State and Ohio State, they don't face Michigan until November. They have plenty of time to figure these things out. The bad news is they don't play Michigan until November. That means Michigan doesn't play them till November. So any issues that Michigan has at trying to solve its woes, it will have the same amount of time. And Michigan is the one that is currently the king on the mountaintop. So it'll be interesting. All right, so that's going to do it for us today. We will see what we do tomorrow. We take things day by day, especially this time of year. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will be back soon. Peace.